So the relationship between trans community and lesbian community, and I'll just include, governmental entities. Well, community is much too strong a word to use for trans in those days. There really wasn't a community of us. My take. Now, that's because it was hard enough just to come out to a support group and get together, let alone even think of passing legislation or going out and being that public or so on and so forth. So there was just a few. And those early discussions really revolved around basic questions, like someone might say to me, I can't possibly be a woman, me, or I can't possibly, fight for feminist issues. They would say I would have all kinds of problems with that. So having those kinds of discussions, recognizing what we're talking about as a question of identity, and recognizing how to build allyship among larger concepts that we might all be working for, and then dispelling fears like, is this some sort of perversion? Is this a sickness? Is this a temporary diversion of your true sexuality? Or is this something else? And working through all of those things, which wasn't easy in the early years because we ourselves, I myself, didn't have complete answers to all those things. Now we have worldwide evidence-based research that can back up statements like this being a human condition. Or, I mentioned the standards of care, international standards of care for transgender issues. In the latest version 7, there's actually a statement that transgender, transsexual, gender variant, gender nonconforming are all aspects of diversity, not pathology. But back then, isn't this just something else? Those kinds of intense all-night discussions sometimes. And then finally we'd break through. And people would begin to say, well, wow, it doesn't really matter. Well, come to the next event, and I would show up at the next event and table or whatever it took. And when we did that enough, and we built allyship and connection, it really moved things along. And when we dispelled the fears, because there's always fears, sometimes people sometimes people will say, especially in corporation settings, well, what are they going to do in the bathroom? And the humorous answer is, well, they're going to pee and get out, and that's really all there is to it. But what that question contains, in my opinion, and always has, is a fear. Like, I don't understand. How can anyone change gender? What is that? Is it something that might be scary or dangerous in some way? No. Once we dispel all those fears, the concerns drop away, or they're mitigated, and now we can just get on with the work together. And that's what was happening way back when, but I didn't have the exact language for that. We just talk until it came out. So that's how it was early on, and then later on, and even today, there is a certain small band, a certain kind of feminism that will reject transgender, but it's very small and rather nasty, and most people recognize that. Or there'll be gay men who say, no way, but also very small. Or there will be religious objections, and yet when you take that one apart, it fails as well. And many of the progressive religious groups, I'm not a believer, I'm an atheist myself, but I work so much with the religious organizations because they're powerful, and the good ones, to put it in my terms, the progressive ones are great allies, and trans can be fully and wholly part of that as well. So, so the difference is now we do it together with many folks, sometimes organizations with whole staffs, many activists, many folks having these conversations. We're past the question of what is it, we're on to how do we do this, how do we work together inclusively. And the trans community itself is now at a stage of maturity where we can help others. Like, it's now possible to settle these kinds of issues of sense of self and say, well, what else do I want to do? I want to do something with the labor community. I want to do something with the arts community. I want to do something, in other words, something else to help another group. Or I want to help with poverty or schools or whatever it is. And many of our folks are doing that now. And building a connection. And then when they're there and they're doing that great work, somebody, if they ever bring up the transgender issue, it's either, well, so, literally. Or it's, oh, tell us about that. What is it? And how can we do more and bring more trans folks into our group? Yeah, just the other day it was delightful. We're on the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, you know, and there was a big celebration last weekend, and I was invited and some others, and Pride at Work, the LGBTQ labor group, and it was great to be there with all the civil rights activists and just talking about rights and civil rights and justice, and we're just there. We're not L or G or B or T primarily, but we're there maybe to represent the groups as an equal partner. That's just thrilling. Big difference from the old days.